What's going on, family? Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. We're going to continue our conversation with you concerning the complete history of boxing. And we're talking about Joe Louis and Max Schmeling, and we'll go through the Joe Louis scrapbook and Max Schmeling. They have their own book, Max Schmeling and Joe Louis, 1,000 pages, 2,000 front and back. Just that fight alone with Joe Louis and Max Schmeling, articles from all over the world. And the reason why I'm showing you these articles is because I want to give you a real-life vision of what that fight was, but also the time of the men who fought during that era. What was happening? We're talking about Charlie Billy and Black Murder. So I just want to set this up through the Joe Louis and Max Schmeling fight. And that's the purpose of this video. And Joe Louis would train very intensely for this fight because it meant a great deal. He would lose his fight in 1936 to Max Schmeling, and he never forgot that because the youth never forgot it. Joe Louis meant so much to them. Joe Louis, between you and I, he employed a lot of people because you would have sometimes 2 to 3 newspaper write-ups of Joe Louis per day. Extra, read all about it, sometimes at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. And this is why Joe Louis was training. Anything happened to Joe Louis. If Joe Louis went to the barber shop, they put an article in the newspaper and you would buy the entire newspaper. And it's the same that Joe Louis didn't have any legal rights to advertisements because they made a lot of money off of Joe Louis. The Shoeshine Boys would make many quarters on the night of the fight because all the men would get their shoes shined before Joe Louis' fight. The cleaners, the same thing. The grocery markets, the same thing. The butchers, the same thing. And Joe Louis just provided a lot of income for those who would make money because of his content. The days of Joe Louis are no more, but Joe Louis is no more. The time that Joe Louis would come will bring value to the household because of the conversations, because of the respect and dignity in the class in which he came. Let's look a little deeper into Joe Louis and Max Schmeling, right here on the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. Now, Max Schmeling would spend 10 days in the hospital for a spine injury. There were articles in pages 217, 18, 19, and 21, as you can see here. New York, June 23rd. Valid senseless by champion Joe Louis. Barrage of punches in their heavyweight title fight last night. Max Schmeling will be confined to Polyclinic Hospital for 10 days. Joe Jacobs, his American manager, announced this afternoon. Dr. Robert E. Bremen, who was attending the German, advised 3 weeks in bed for complete recuperation from a fractured of the transverse process, bony structured link to the lower part of the spine. But Schmeling said he was determined to sail from the homeland on July 2nd, Jacobs revealed. Now, as I read, like I tell you all the time, I have glasses and it's hard, it's very blurry for me, and you wouldn't think so, looking through this camera here because of the glare. I just try to give you what I can. And what they're saying basically here, Primo Carnera fought Ernie Scaff. Ernie Scaff was in the ring with Max Baer before that. And he tapped a cyst into his brain, and Carnera popped that cyst, and Ernie Scaff would die in the ring. And they wanted to make sure Max Schmeling would have no internal bleeding, so they wanted to hold him for a few weeks. The manager hints at return bout. Now, I just want to clear something up. In the prior video, I showed you an article that explained there was controversy with the fight film. I don't know if I cleared it up correctly, but John Roxborough, who was the manager of Joe Louis, had complained about tampering of the fight footage that was sent to Germany for the 1938 bout because the fight film was cut short by Germany's broadcasters. They didn't want Germany to know what happened to Max Schmeling. So what they did, it's alleged that they took the fight footage of 1936, that last round, 12th round, when Joe Louis was knocked out, and they tried to show that Joe Louis was knocked out in 38 and not Max Schmeling. And so they went to court and they got that straightened out. But that was a complaint by Joe Louis's manager, John Roxborough. As you can see, Joe Louis with a short 6-inch punch to the kidneys. And this would break the rib and the spine of Max Schmeling. When Joe Louis came out of that corner, he went straight for Max Schmeling. And he applied so much pressure on Max Schmeling that Schmeling couldn't time him. He couldn't counterpunch him. You see, Max Schmeling counterpunched Joe Louis with 72 straight right hands, which would eventually get Joe Louis out of there in 1936 in New York's Yankee Stadium. But this time, Joe Louis would return the favor, and he would unleash some vicious combinations on Max Schmeling, and he would eventually get him out of there in the first round. That was a brutal, brutal knockout. A vicious knockout of Max Schmeling. As you can see here, there's a towel being tossed into the ring. Arthur Donovan is actually throwing the towel back out in this sequence because he was told by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, not directly from the New York SAC, but the SAC was told by Roosevelt, whoever referees this fight, he has to answer to me if he stops the contest until the man is completely knocked out. That man needs to be in a fetal position. I don't care if he's shaking. He has to be out cold. Or you count to 12 before you stop the fight. Now, clearly I'm paraphrasing. That's pretty much what Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted. Now, this is the celebration of Joe Louis when he defeated Max Schmeling. Joe Louis would walk across the Willis Avenue Bridge, and he would go over to the Savoy Manor, where him and Marvin Strata, who was the wife of Joe Louis, they got married before the Max Baer fight, 1935. And they had a private table that was never sat in, even if they were not there, at the Savoy Manor. It was their little spot, and that's where they would go. And I'll tell you, there was a lot of Lindy hopping dancing that evening. Here you have Paul Robeson and Joe Louis. Let's listen in on the radio, as many did in 1938, to hear Joe Louis knock out Max Schmeling in one round.
For the World Heavyweight Championship, weighing 193, wearing purple trunks, outstanding contender for heavyweight honors, the former heavyweight title holder, Max Schmeling.
Right and left to the head.
jaw, a right for the head, and Donovan is watching carefully. Lewis measured him, right for the body, a left hook to the jaw, and Schmeling is down. The count is 5, 6, 7, 8. The men are in the ring. The fight is over on a technical knockout. Max Schmeling is beaten in 1 round. The time, 2 minutes, 4 seconds. First round. Referee stops it. The winner and still champion, Joe Lewis.
In the dressing room after the Lewis was as jubilant as it is possible for him to be.
I waited 2 years for the revenge, and now I got it.